What up, and welcome to Pound the Rock, theScore's NBA podcast, presented by Subway. I'm Joe Wolfon. I am in studio, as always, with co-host Joseph Cacharo.
What's going on?
Not too much, man. We are at a point in the NBA postseason where each first-round series is 2 games old. So this seems like as good a time as any to jump in and talk about what we've seen so far. And I mean, I want to start by kind of looking back and revisiting our predictions coming into the playoffs. And to do that, we'll get into some Sweet versus Heat, a segment brought to you by our friends at Subway, whose new Sweet versus Heat chicken sandwiches are asking people to choose which side they're on. So let's talk about which side we're on, Cash. And looking back to how we thought these series would play out, I'm going to ask you for 2 series where you feel like you're pretty sweet on what your predictions were coming into the playoffs, and 2 predictions that you think you should be taking heat for 2 games in. So give me one of your sweet predictions first that you're feeling pretty good about.
Well, the easiest one is I'm feeling pretty damn sweet about it because it's Bucks Pistons, and that's not even a playoff series. That's the best team in the NBA right now, playing against a team without Blake Griffin that would probably be like a 12 seed in the East. Like, it honestly doesn't even have the feel of a playoff series. Like, you watch that game on Wednesday night. I mean, it doesn't help that it's on NBA TV, but even like the crowd in Milwaukee, I almost don't blame them because I guess it's hard to get that revved up when your team's coasting. And the Pistons actually were up at halftime of game 2, but at no point did I actually feel like they were a threat to win the game.
Yeah.
We'll see what happens when it gets back to Detroit and maybe Blake Griffin returns. But
yeah, no, I feel bad just not even really talking about the Bucks. Because they have taken care of business in obviously a really impressive way. And, I mean, for the Pistons, I give them credit, too, for showing up and especially in Game 2, you know, playing pretty hard and making that at least somewhat of a game after they got their doors blown off in Game 1. But it's just not that interesting to talk about because, like you said, you know, the disparity there is so significant, and Blake Griffin's now out for the entire series. So it's not even like there's an iota of a chance that they're going to make this remotely interesting. So we'll revisit the Bucks, I think, next round when things get a little bit more challenging for them.
You think they'll get there?
I think they're looking okay so far. I mean, I feel bad for Dwayne Casey, who's probably about to get swept out of the playoffs for the 4th time in the last 5 years. This time, unlike I think some of those other sweeps, it's not really on him. I don't think there's anything that he can do to change this outcome. And I probably should have excluded this from consideration for predictions that we're feeling best about because we both picked Bucks in 4.
Yeah,
before we even knew that Blake Griffin wasn't going to play.
Right.
So
I will say I agree with you that it's not on Dwayne Casey. Having said that, there's been like a couple weird lineup things, like starting Thon Maker. Both games has gone disastrously. The fact that he came back with it in Game 2 is. All right, you want me to give you my second sweet team, or are you going to give me a sweet series?
Give me your second one.
All right, the one I actually wanted to bring up because it was one that I thought would be a tightly competitive one, and I don't think you were as sold on that being the case, is Sixers-Nets.
Yeah, that's totally fair. I picked Sixers in 5, and honestly, I'm not entirely sure I'm ready to move off of that prediction yet. I definitely, after that Game 1, was sweating it. And even now, like going back to Brooklyn, I kind of do expect the Nets to take a game there. But I'm still feeling pretty confident about the Sixers in this series. But tell me why you're feeling good about it being a competitive series, aside from the obvious, which is that they really embarrassed the Sixers in Game 1.
Yeah, I had Sixers in 6, I believe. And I just thought, the Nets could give them a series. For one, I said I wasn't completely sold on the fact that Joel Embiid was healthy. I don't think any of us were, really. And the Sixers won Game 2 big, and I think Embiid did put up some decent numbers, but like, he's not playing a lot. Boban Marjanovic, who had a really good Game 2, played, I think, a lot more than most of us would have assumed through 2 games. So Embiid's not looking great. I think it was after Game 2. It was after the game they won when Embiid played all right. If anyone saw, like, anything he was doing after the game, going to his podium, coming back, he was doing it on a golf cart. Like, they were not even letting him walk to his scrum. Like, that's what we're looking at right now with Joel Embiid, and we're 4 days into round 1. So his health, number one. Second of all, there are certain like teams and the way they're made up that I think are made to kind of like steal a playoff game or upset a higher seed, and it's I don't think the Nets are the most fundamentally sound roster, but they play a very fundamentally sound game in the sense that they hunt the most efficient shots. They try to limit the other team to the least efficient shots. And then they've got a couple guys like D'Angelo Russell, even Spencer Dinwiddie and Karis LeVert that are kind of like heat check guys. And yeah, I don't trust them to be the top options on like a contending team for the whole year. But if they're going up against a Goliath, I do think they're the kind of players that if they get hot can steal a game or two. And I think that's exactly what we've seen so far.
Right. And to that point about Embiid, it's clear that he's not close to 100%. I would just say, as evidenced in that game too, he can still be extremely impactful and probably the most impactful player in the series, even when he is physically compromised. And for me, I think his defense has still been really, really good. And the big issue in game one for the Sixers was that their perimeter defense just couldn't hold up at all. I mean, they were getting blown by at the point of attack, could not contain dribble penetration, were getting carved up in the pick and roll, specifically by Spencer Dinwiddie and Karis LeVert, who, like I said, were just kind of getting into the paint at will. And Dinwiddie, I think, in particular, has done a really good job hunting mismatches, getting big guys switched onto him, and just dusting them off of the dribble. He's been outstanding. I mean, D'Angelo Russell really settled himself down in that game one because he had a tough start. And the Sixers are playing this drop coverage against him that's going to open things up for him in the mid-range. But I think he was forcing some off-balance floaters, not really getting great shots, and his shot selection in general is not the best. But I think because the Sixers were just doing such a poor job of basically trailing him over top of that screens, he wasn't feeling any pressure, and he had all kinds of time to settle into a rhythm. And it's really just incumbent, I think, on Philadelphia's perimeter defenders and the guys who are guarding on ball in the pick and roll to be able to make him feel something when they're giving him those rear view pursuits. So I thought they did a much better job of that in game two. Their perimeter defense was much improved. I think having James Ennis there instead of Jonathan Simmons made a big difference. Ben Simmons, I thought, guarding on the perimeter was way better in game two than he was in game one. Ben Simmons in general was way better in game two.
He was the best player on the floor in game two.
Yeah, and I think... So a couple things. Embiid did not settle for a three-pointer. He didn't take one in game two. His shot looked all kinds of off in game one. And the Nets proved, obviously, that they're going to give him that all day. They're going to give him the space to shoot that. And if the shot's not there, I mean, there are a couple things they can do. One is they can just try and pivot into some dribble handoffs. And they really, I credit the Nets for doing a good job of sort of top blocking and not allowing Redick to come and get those dribble handoffs. But I thought Embiid did a good job of basically just not settling for those jumpers and reestablishing post position when he needed to. Ben Simmons, I thought, did a really good job pushing the ball and making sure the Sixers got out in transition. That, to me, started with their defense. But when obviously he gets bogged down in the half court, Jared Dudley said Ben Simmons in the half court is an average player. Honestly, that is maybe being generous to him. When he's in the open floor, he's a completely different animal, and he was getting out and running in that game too, and it made all the difference in the world. And they weren't really waiting for Embiid either, who's laboring up and down the court. They can grab and go even if he's trailing behind and still score because, like I was saying before the series started, they just have a size advantage at pretty much every position, and I think they should be able to overwhelm Brooklyn physically. So I don't know. I mean, did you see anything specific in that 51-point third quarter? Again, a 51-point third quarter that busted open game two. Did you see anything that was like totally unsustainable? I mean, obviously, I don't expect them to put up 51 in a quarter again, but what they were doing, which was, I mean, for one thing, getting stops, running off of misses, getting out in transition and semi-transition, working the ball inside, and I think when they were on the perimeter and when guys like Simmons and Embiid were being ignored out there, making sure that they were turning those into screening actions to get guys open.
Yeah, and I don't think any of that is unsustainable. Again, it's not sustainable at that rate where they're going to score 200 points a game, but all those things, picking apart the mismatches they have, the size advantages they had, which you mentioned before the play, like all of those things are sustainable, and not only sustainable, they're things they should be doing on a consistent basis in this series. I just think, look, we've talked about how talented that five-man starting unit is. I think in that third quarter, I think we know, that was as good as that unit has played together since the deadline when they picked up Tobias Harris. Like, they legitimately looked unstoppable against a not terrible Nets team in a playoff game. So I think if they keep hammering home on those advantages, like, they're going to win the series. I still do think Brooklyn takes one more, and my Sixers in 6 pick will look all right. Although the one thing I guess I will mention is I don't know how much of a home court like Brooklyn's home court advantage isn't great in the sense of like, I don't know what their actual home record was, but in terms of their like fan support, they don't exactly have the rowdiest fan base.
Right.
I don't know how many Nets, like pure Nets fans there even are. Plus, there's going to be a lot of Sixers fans there because Pennsylvania and New York obviously are, like Philly and New York are pretty close. There are some players that play for Philly. I don't know about right now, but I know in the past there have been players that play for Philly and live closer to New York because it's that close in certain areas. So like, I don't think the Nets' home court advantage is going to be that much of a factor.
Yeah, no, I mean, I guess we'll find out like how revved up that crowd is going to be because for a team that has been in the doldrums for a few years and has had this really unexpected feel-good season, you would expect the crowd to be super fired up about its first home playoff game in, I don't know what it's been, 4 years?
Yeah, 4 years.
2014-15, yeah.
The only other thing I'll add about this series is I really do think Joel Embiid should have been injected from game 2 for his elbow. Yeah, that was pretty vicious. That was like a swinging full power elbow.
Yeah, props to Jared Allen for just bouncing right up off the mat after that too, because that could have taken somebody's head off.
Someone, again, I always forget when it comes to my mind like who actually tweeted it, but someone tweeted the night it happened that if Joel Embiid did that to like an average size human, their head would pop off like Dennis Hopper's in Speed. If anyone's ever seen that scene in the movie.
Yeah. I have, and I know exactly what you're saying. So, yeah, I mean, I'm actually still feeling somewhat confident in Sixers in 5, but I wouldn't be particularly surprised if the Nets got one at home. And I do think, I mean, if we're looking ahead, that Embiid injury just has to be concerning because I don't anticipate them surviving a second-round series with him in the state that he's in right now.
With him needing a golf cart to move around the arena?
Yeah. So one prediction that I'm feeling pretty sweet about is Warriors in 5. And I did not expect anything like what happened in Game 2 of that series. But broadly speaking, I did expect them to have a letdown game.
That's exactly why you picked them in 5 when I picked them in 4.
You know, from this point forward, I would hope or I would assume that would serve as something of a wake-up call where they're not going to coast anymore and they're going to start to take this Clippers team seriously. To lose from 31 points up in the third quarter, I mean, that is insane to happen to any team at any point in time. But for it to happen to an all-time great team in a 1 versus 8 series is pretty mind-blowing. Yeah, I mean, I just, for a team as good and like I said, as all-time historically great as this Warriors team is, they're pretty damn combustible. And I think there's always, you know, a push and pull and a complicated sense of agency when a comeback like this happens, where it's like, are you crediting the team that made the comeback, or are you blaming the team that allowed that comeback to happen? And I think, as always, it's a mixture of both. I think the Warriors definitely took their foot off the gas in that game, and by the time they were ready to re-engage, the Clippers sort of just had them on the ropes a little bit. The Clippers deserve a ton of credit for coming back in that game. I mean, they were down 31 and they were still pushing the ball up the floor, like getting into the teeth of the defense, being super aggressive. And Lou Williams, I think, played maybe the single best game that I've ever seen.
38
him play.
and 11, 36 and 11.
And so I can go one of two ways with that. I mean, I'll say I'm still feeling very confident Warriors in 5. And I'm hoping this was the one letdown game that I expected and there won't be another one. But one area that I can say I was absolutely wrong is I thought that Lou Williams was going to be neutralized in this series. And the reason I thought that was, you know, I anticipated the Warriors kind of putting Klay Thompson on him, putting Andre Iguodala on him and smothering him. For one thing, even when Klay Thompson was guarding him in that game, he was hitting some absolutely ridiculous shots, and there was nothing at all that Klay could do about it. The other thing is the Clippers have done a really good job hunting mismatches with Lou, getting him switched. Like, they attacked Quinn Cook relentlessly when Quinn Cook was on the floor in that game. And when it's been, you know, like a more traditional Warriors lineup, it's like he's looking to attack their bigs going downhill. And him and Harrell in the pick and roll have absolutely torn the Warriors apart. So I was obviously wrong about that. He was playing unbelievably well. And, you know, the Warriors are going to have to kind of go back and figure out a way to neutralize that pick and roll.
I was so impressed by the Clippers comeback, but in the way they came back. I think a lot of times when you think about those kind of like outlier comebacks that'll kind of never happen again. Literally the biggest comeback in postseason history was 31 points in the third quarter. You think of, okay, yeah, one team's taking their foot off the gas. Maybe they think it's garbage time and empty their bench, and then the team that's down starts getting away from their regular offense, just starts jacking threes. Like, it's usually this weird sequence of events that happens. That was not the case here. The Clippers, down 31 in the third quarter against this all-time team, they literally just continued to execute their game plan. And it was kind of awesome to see that they were not rattled in the least bit. Like, I wrote about this too. They're down 31, and there's Patrick Beverley still defending Kevin Durant the exact same way as if it was a one-possession game in the fourth quarter. Getting into him, his head's like in his hip. It was awesome. Down 25, there was a play where like Montrezl Harrell didn't get the ball, but like he rolled so hard to the rim. Again, you'd think this was like the guts of a crunch time moment. On the other end, like on the same end, Lou Williams, like poking and prodding the Warriors defense and doing his thing and showing those playmaking skills that he's really developed the last couple of years. Like they just kept coming, and it wasn't this one huge run that wasn't sustainable. They just continued to play their game, and they chipped away and they chipped away. And before the Warriors knew it, they were in a crunch time game that they had mentally checked out of about the half hour earlier.
Right. So
just full credit to the Clippers, full credit to Doc Rivers, who continues to do just magical things with this roster. And as for the Warriors, look, I don't want to overreact to one loss. They're obviously not losing this series. They might not even lose another game in this series, and they're still, rightfully so, the heavy favorites to win the title. But this still goes back to a lot of what we've been talking about with them this year, where just like something, I don't know what it is. I don't know how to put my finger on it, but like something doesn't seem Warriors-y with this Warriors team. Kevin Durant kind of insinuated it a few weeks ago. Remember when I guess Steve Kerr did, when he said they had to play more angry. And then Kevin Durant came out and said, I thought like we're the Warriors supposed to be playing with joy. What's this? I don't know. It's just these like little things adding up over the course of a season where they don't seem to have that air of invincibility about them, and other teams seem to sense it too.
Right. This is why I took the field over the Warriors coming into the playoffs, and this was just a perfect example of it. This team is obviously still so loaded with talent, and when they ratchet it up to their highest gear, they're obviously extremely, extremely tough to beat. But it just seems like that's happening less and less. And like I was saying, I mean, it's one thing for a team to blow a 31-point lead in the second half of a game, of a playoff game, no less. But for it to be a team as talented as the Warriors that blows that lead is like, it's got to be a little bit concerning. Even though this game probably won't matter in the grand scheme of things, it's like you were saying, another team can look at that and be like, these guys can be had. And as much as we credit the Clippers for making that comeback, which, again, they deserve all the credit in the world, the Warriors had some of these straight-up dumbest turnovers that I've ever seen in the second half of that game. Just so many lazy passes, inattentiveness. I mean, there was one play where on an inbounds play with like 2 seconds on the shot clock, they fouled Gallinari inexplicably. Steph had some miserable turnovers, like got his pocket picked at midcourt by Patrick Beverley, had a terrible pass when they were playing for the last shot in the third quarter that turned into a pick six.
Steph also only used 2 of the Warriors' final 9 possessions. Mm-hmm. Think about that.
Yeah,
that's absurd.
They've struggled a little bit when guys are face guarding him to find ways to like leverage that attention and get other guys open shots. It's like sometimes it looks like they just don't really know what to do when Steph's being taken out of the game. And I thought this was one of those times. He had a great start to that game, a huge first half after he'd had an unbelievable game one. I mean, I can't stress enough how good he was in game one. But yeah, I mean, it seems like a lot of the time they have struggled to match the Clippers' energy and their force. And you talked about Harrell. I mean, Harrell rolling to the basket has just been an absolute steamroller in this series. And it's not just that he's rolling hard and that he's extremely physical and extremely strong. He's really honed his touch. Like, his finishing on the roll has been excellent. And it's, sometimes it's like he's just grabbing the ball and dunking it. But sometimes he's got to go to that little push shot. He's finishing through contact from weird angles, and he's putting everything in the basket. It's pretty impressive.
Yeah, no, the second half was just unbelievable to watch. It's, for a team that good to blow a lead that big at home in a playoff game was unbelievable. And like I said, I wrote about it Tuesday morning, I guess, and not to get too poetic, but the way I saw it was like, look, yeah, the Clippers, they're not going to be there in the end, but this show is called Pound the Rock, and it's based off a motto that Dwayne Casey brought to Toronto, but Greg Popovich originally instilled in San Antonio, and it's based on the Stonecutter's credo, which is that, a stonecutter will pound a piece of stone 100 times and you won't see any damage. And then when it cracks on the 101st time, it wasn't that 101st blow that did it. It was all those blows before it. And that's kind of the way I saw this game, in that, like, the Clippers aren't going to beat the Warriors, but if someone does down the line, there are these little things throughout the course of the season, and this collapse was one of them that we will look at and be like, okay, there was a crack.
Right.
There, you know what I mean? There was something that led to the crack. There was something, and then it finally...
They loosened the lid of that pickle jar just enough for somebody else to unscrew it.
Exactly.
So, yeah, I mean, one thing we should talk about, too, is obviously DeMarcus Cousins goes down with what looks like a torn quad muscle. Steve Kerr kind of left the door a little bit open for him to return in the playoffs. I don't think that that's going to happen. And I think the interesting thing about this is, like, the Warriors didn't necessarily need him, and I think he's been a bit of a detriment at times. Like in that game one, Kevon Looney I thought was way better than him, and Looney is not as good a player as DeMarcus Cousins. He makes way more sense, I think, with this Warriors team, given his skill set. So I don't think this is a situation where it's like it's really going to hurt the Warriors that much. I do think it would have been awfully nice for them to have that ace up their sleeves. And, we're looking ahead to a potential Warriors-Rockets second round. I mean, he had a monster game against the Rockets in the regular season where he showed kind of how he could tilt the balance of that matchup, because if the Rockets sort of want to switch every on-ball screening action, it's like there's Cousins with the ability to turn those into post-ups where he's just mashing like Aaron Gordon in the post. And as just sort of like a matchup buster, I thought he presented some really interesting options. The other thing is just for Cousins himself, this just sucks. I mean, there's no other way to slice it. Like, he's playing in his first playoff games ever. I mean, this was his second ever playoff game after his first one went pretty disastrously. And now he's just like not even really going to get a chance to contribute or write a playoff legacy for himself. And now he's going into free agency having had a ruptured Achilles and now a pretty serious quad injury. I mean, it's going to torpedo his market. And honestly, if anything, it might signal that he's going to end up back with the Warriors again next season, because they obviously weren't going to be able to afford him if he was going to hit the open market healthy, after a potentially solid playoff run. But at this point in time, I mean, it might not take anything more than like the taxpayers mid-level to sign him. Yeah,
I do think this will actually keep him in the Bay Area. The way his value went from like surefire max to a 1-year deal, like in the last couple of years, the way that's happened, he's kind of like the big man's equivalent of Isaiah Thomas. Obviously not, Boogie's injury is more severe, really, like when you look at them, but very similar in terms of the way their careers ended up playing out when they could have been max free agents. But for me, the Boogie injury from the Warriors' perspective, it is big. Aside from the narrative of the fact that they were calling this the Boogie season, because
we should say he doesn't want to be called Boogie anymore.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah,
but, I know it's a tough.
But the Warriors were calling it the Boogie season, literally. Like they were saying that this was a season for Boogie, and like the joy they were going to find and the motivation they were going to find after all these years of getting to the finals was winning one for DeMarcus Cousins and helping him shed the label of his past. So that aside, from a basketball perspective, I do think this is a big deal. I agree with everyone who's brought up the fact that Kevon Looney makes more sense for them, especially defensively, and fits in general what they want to do better. But the thing is, when the Warriors want to be at their best, neither one of Kevon Looney or DeMarcus Cousins fits it anyway, because they go with the death lineup, right? The Hamptons 5. So really, what you're looking at is who then gives them a different look, who gives them something else. And the whole reason they brought DeMarcus Cousins in was to essentially eliminate the one weakness and the one area opponents could exploit. And that was okay, if we go big on them, maybe we can crash the glass. Maybe we can punish them inside. You bring DeMarcus Cousins in, that's not so much of a factor anymore, because the game 2 against the Clippers is a perfect example. You don't think if they had DeMarcus Cousins in the post, even if it was 6 minutes, they could have dumped it in there for 2-3 buckets that could have staved off a rally at some points. There's just I don't know. DeMarcus Cousins could was a bit of a slump buster in situations like that. He could punish teams that thought they could go big against the Warriors, and they just don't have that anymore. And yeah, they're still going to be at their best with the Hamptons 5, and Looney will give them good minutes that make more sense than Cousins defensively. But I really do think that from a basketball perspective, it is, kind of a bigger deal than people are letting on.
Yeah, I'm not so sure about that. I mean, I think the point about the Rockets is, like we've mentioned it before, and it's, the Warriors' lack of a viable post-up threat was the reason that the Rockets could sort of get away with switching everything. He looked so vulnerable defensively that I don't know how much of a value add there was ultimately going to be. I think if you're looking at, now their sort of backup center option, if you want to call it that, because there is a limit to how many minutes they can play with Draymond Green at the 5. He can't do it for a full game. And Looney's probably going to give you about 20 minutes a game. Maybe they go like 15 minutes a game with Green at the 5. That's still leaving like 12 minutes there, and now you're looking at basically Andrew Bogut. So,
who wasn't even in the league a month ago?
Yeah. And to his credit, I mean, he's looked all right, but I don't know how confident they should feel about him being their backup center. I mean, maybe Looney's up for playing like 25, 30 minutes a game. That very well could be the case. He's looked really good. And like we said, he's a lot more mobile than Cousins. And they don't need him to do a whole lot offensively, aside from just like set really solid screens, roll hard to the rim, and dunk any lob that comes his way. And, defensively, he moves around well. He can protect the rim. He can switch a little bit. So I think ultimately, I mean, the question that I have about that is, like, were they going to get to a place where they were playing Cousins like 12 minutes a game? Were they going to get to a place where they were bringing him off the bench? Or were they going to keep starting him and playing him like 20 to 25 minutes? Because I think if they weren't willing to make that move, then ultimately he was taking more things off the table than he was providing. Just because the stuff that he provides offensively isn't all that useful on a Warriors team that is already so rife with scoring and playmaking ability. So again, it sucks for Cousins, no two ways about that. But for the Warriors themselves, I don't think it changes their outlook all that much.